Did you know most service-based business owners price their services incorrectly? Well, they set their prices by what they want to make versus what they need to make. And this makes a huge difference. And if you don't believe me, how many times have you gotten to the end of the month and there just is not enough money? You thought you made enough money, but the reality is you didn't. So what's the reason? Well, it's because you're setting your prices with an employee mentality versus a business owner mentality. And I'm not saying you're doing it on purpose, and it's a mistake that a lot of people make. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to walk you through how to make sure that you're pricing like a business owner would price it versus just an employee. All right, so if you're ready, let's dive in on how to price your services correctly. Now, before you price anything, it's really important you understand the calculation that I say all of the time. It all boils down to this: sales minus cost of goods minus expenses equals your profits. It's something you need to memorize and you need to say all the time. Anytime you set a price, you need to have this calculation in the back of your head. Sales minus costs minus expenses equals profits. And here's why. Because most people mess up in this section right here of costs and expenses. What they fail to account for are the right costs. And this is where that employee mentality comes in. And I'm going to break this down, and I think it's going to make a lot more sense for you. They also fail to plan for the expenses that are in the company. And they're two different things. One is the cost for you to be able to provide the service, and then the other one are the expenses to run the business, hence where the business owner also comes in. So we're going to take a look at some things that happen. When you're looking at the cost to provide the service, you have the products that you use to provide the service, and then you have the labor hours to actually do the service. And this includes even if you are a solopreneur, even if you're the one doing it, there are labor hours involved. Now, there's two different ways that you get paid, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But it's right here where people tend to leave this off when they're looking at costs. They tend to focus on the products that they use and fail to account for the proper way to do the labor hours to do the service. All right, because remember, like I said, you wear two hats in your business. The first hat that you wear is an employee in the business, and the second hat you wear is as the business owner. As an employee, you get wages to do the service that you're doing. These are what go under the costs. But as a business owner, you get paid through the owner's draw, which comes out of the end of our calculation, which is the profit side of it. So because you're wearing two hats, you actually get paid two different ways. And what happens is we make the mistake of bundling them together, and the reality is you should not do that, and we'll talk about why. Now, let's take a look once again. So on your sales minus costs minus expenses, you get paid as employee here under the costs, and as a business owner here under the profits, like I just mentioned. Now, as an employee, let's just say you get paid, you're doing the job for 2 hours, and as a regular employee cost, it's $15, which means it's $30. What a lot of people do is they think, oh, I'm a business owner, I should be paid $50 an hour. That's what it should be. No, you need to plug in what you would pay someone else to do that job. And in this case, a fair wage would be $15 to do that job, which means the actual costs need to be plugged in for $30. Now, I get it that you want to make more than that as the business owner, but that's what's going to come over here on the profit side. You want to make that extra $10 over here as the business owner. So you want to make sure that when you're pricing, your cost side of it is what would you pay anybody to do that job, and then the rest of them will be accounted for over here on the profits. And we're going to walk through some examples, like I said, and it'll continue to make more sense for you. So when you're setting your prices, we also have to keep in mind the expenses, because those do have to get paid as well. Now, the problem is, how do you know what number to use when you're pricing out your services to put in for your expenses? Well, ideally, the best thing to do is to grab your profit and loss, because it holds the key to that number. If you go to where your expense line is and figure out the percentage by taking your total expenses for that month, divide it by your total sales, it's going to give you a percentage. And in this case, it says 27.45. So this business owner would know that, hey, I'm going to use about 27% of my sales to go towards expenses in my business. Now, yours might be 15%, 20%, 25%, 50%. Everybody's business is a little bit different. It really depends upon the business and if you have a brick and mortar, if you have vehicles, what kind of advertising you do. This number varies. Expenses covers a lot of different things, but it's important you know on average what yours runs. Now, it will vary month to month, but you need to come up with the average, like what you finished the year at. So in this case, it said 27%. So in this case, if this business owner would always account for 27% of every sale going towards expenses. Now, when we look over here, the problem is if you know what your costs are going to be and you know about what to set aside for expenses, how do you know what price to put? Well, most people, what they do is they just come up with a number. They're like, well, I think I can do this job for $200 or $250 or $40, whatever the case may be. Now, here's the key. You already know your costs. So in this case, let's just take an example. We know we have $50 in parts, and we also know that we have 2 labor hours at $15. So when we look at it, our costs are starting off at $80. So we know at least at minimum in our first part of our calculation, we need to have $80 to cover our costs. Well, we're going to say, all right, I think I can do this job for $120. That's the number that they've come up with. But will it cover the expenses and the profits that this person needs to make? Well, let's find out, shall we? So if we know these two numbers, 120 is what we want to do our service for, and we know our costs are $80. And over here on expenses, since we know our business needs to set aside, say 25%, we can take the 25% times the sales price that we plan to use, and it lets us know that $30 of this is going to be pulled aside and set aside for expenses. So when we plug all of this in, what we get is 120 for sales, 80 for costs, $30 for expenses. It tells us that our profits at the end of the day is going to be $10. Now remember, we got paid in two different columns, right? So because we wear the two hats, we know as an employee we got paid $30 for that service because we accounted for that over in the cost section. And we also know that as a business owner, we made $10 other as a business owner for our owner's draw. So when we set our prices, we know that, hey, I made $40 in my business between both hats for that particular service. Now you might be asking yourself, why do I need to capture both hats? Why can't I just lump them together? Why can't I not just go do the sale and then put the money in my pocket? Remember, your business's worth is based off of the profits, not what you pay yourself as an employee in the business. If you were to turn around and sell your business, people want to know how much money they're going to make. They may not want to do what it is that you do, but they might just want to buy the business and plug someone in to do the actual work, in which case that's why you're putting in a typical wage under the cost side to do that business, because now if somebody's buying your business, they care about that $10 at the end, not that $30, because they don't plan to actually do it. And that's not how a business works. A business says, hey, there's labor involved in the business, and that's going to be under my costs or my expenses, depending upon my business. What I care is the value of the business. It's in the profits. And that's why we want to make sure that we capture both of those. Now, the question becomes, do you own a business or did you just create yourself a job? You need to be thinking just like a CEO, because when you're pricing your services, it's really important that you consider both those hats. And that's one of the biggest reasons that we do what it is that we do when we're pricing this out, to use this calculation. Now, let's take one more example. Let's do a handyman job. Let's just say their handyman goes out, does a bid, and they're going to be installing a ceiling fan, fixing a leaky valve, and changing some filters. At the end of the day, they know they need $100 in parts, and it's going to take about 2 hours to get it done. What they would pay labor would be about $20 an hour. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they're going to charge for the job. It just means that from a labor standpoint, that's what they need to capture. And their expenses typically run about 20%. So we're going to take our calculation, sales minus costs minus expenses, to get to the profit. And we're going to say, how is this handyman going to bid this job out? So the handyman already knows their costs are $100 in parts, and $20 per hour at 2 labor hours is $40, which means their costs are already set up for $140. So over here on sales, they're thinking about charging $200. So they're going to plug all of this in so they can start figuring out, is that the right price for them? So we know the $200, we know the $140 in costs. So we can go over here really quick to the expenses and say 20% of the 200 means $40 needs to be set aside for the expenses of the business. So when we plug this all in, the 200 minus the 140 minus the 40 for expenses means they're going to have an additional profits of $20. So once again, in our two hats, the employee made $40 piece of it. So the business owner as an employee made that $40. Keep that in mind. And as the business owner, they made an additional $20 in profits. So in total for this particular job, they made $60. So they're able to account for them as the employee in the business and them as the business owner. They walked away from that job with $60. Hopefully that makes sense, and it makes it really easy for you to be able to understand when you're pricing your services. You want to make sure that you are paid as an employee and as a business owner. Make sure you are separating out those costs versus profits. They're two totally different things when you're pricing. And don't forget to account for your other business expenses. That's what makes people not have any money at the end of the month, because what they do is they fail to account that some of that money has to be set aside for their expenses. And then when the bills start rolling in, they have to start digging into their pockets to pay for it. When the reality is, after each service and after each job, you can actually take a certain percentage and put it aside because you know it's coming. All right. Just remember, sales minus cost minus expenses equals your final profit. It's really important that when you're doing your pricing, you keep this in mind. Now it's your turn. I want you to go pick a recent service or a common service that you do and go through this whole exercise and ask yourself, are you pricing correctly? Are you accounting for all the parts of your business? And are you separating out your wages with your two hats? And are you accounting for your expenses? And if you like what you see today and you've learned something, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss a video, and hit that like button so other people know they should watch this video as well. And if you want to learn more about your business numbers, there is a course on Know Your Business Numbers. It's just over at knowyourbusinessnumberscourse.com, or click the link below. In the meantime, I want you to get out there and be the badass that I know you are.